Spend the night with Eddie. Harlem Nights.
Eddie Murphy was great.
He's very sexy. I like Eddie's laugh.
Yeah.
Eddie was hysterical.
Oh,
The funniest part, I don't think I can say on TV.
you gotta see it. It's fantastic.
It's the best movie he's ever made. Let's get busy and see Harlem Nights.
Eddie Murphy, Richard Pryor. Harlem Nights. Rated R. Now playing at theaters everywhere.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Not Content Podcast. My name is Jerome and we are going to be discussing just a terrible movie tonight. We're going to be discussing Harlem Nights from the Q Podcasting Network. So my name is Jerome and of course, and my co-host is Brian. Please leave a 4 or 5-star review on Apple or Spotify. Please click the bell icon on YouTube for notifications, and also like and subscribe to us on that same channel. Brian, Harlem Nights has me flustered. You can hear it in my voice.
Listen, we gotta have to put some background on this, besides the fact that Eddie Murphy directed and wrote this by himself. This movie came out in 1989. We know for a fact that 1989 is known as one of the worst movies in terms of scripts because of the fact that 1988 had a writer's strike. So that is the only reason I can come up with as to why the script for this movie is so underdeveloped and underpolished. Like, I give Eddie Murphy credit for making a good skeleton, but he did fill in the skeleton like you should as a scriptwriter. He just felt like he wrote a first draft, and because of some of the rules when it comes to writing in Hollywood and the union and stuff like that, it felt like maybe they couldn't even touch the script anymore because at a certain point you got to stop if there's a strike going on, like we learned this year or last couple of years. So my assumption is that they got to like a first or second draft, couldn't get beyond that point to change the script, and just said, fuck it, we'll have Eddie Murphy direct it and just go with it because we need to film this really quick. That's my assumption for all this. They could have waited a year maybe and find like a guy to do a script doctoring on this thing and fix the script, and definitely get Eddie Murphy out of the director chair, or maybe give it to Malcolm, or give it to maybe Spike Lee. I think because Spike Lee would have been a better choice for this movie for sure. But there's a lot of things going for this movie that kind of are throwing darts at the wall, but at the same time they had to bill it as a comedy because they put comedians in dramatic roles, and that was the big mistake.
I think it's really strange to me that you have Richard Pryor, Eddie Murphy, Arsenio Hall, and Redd Foxx, and none of them are particularly funny. Redd Foxx is probably the funniest by default, but this is such a weird movie because you watch this movie on mute, and it probably looks pretty good, right? I think it's pretty well stylized. But
it got an Oscar nomination for a costume design, so there you go.
I think if this movie were to get an Oscar nomination, that's what I would nominate it for. But it just feels like this movie is very much miscast, and Richard Pryor was diagnosed with MS a few years earlier, and I don't want to be mean, but he is not in a condition to be the co-lead with Eddie Murphy at this point in his life, and it sucks to say that. Again, I like Richard Pryor's stand-up. He is, of course, phenomenal at it, but like I said, I've never been sold on his movie career. I think he's funny in a couple of movies with Gene Wilder because of the chemistry, but I watch him in Superman 3, I watch him in this, and obviously, he's not in nearly the condition to perform that he should be, but I always walk away disappointed when I watch a Richard Pryor movie. This being no exception.
I watched Brewster's Millions, and that has John Candy, and that has a lot going for it, but then it kind of falters at the end. But it's a fun premise, and he's fun in that. But he's a lot more emotion. He's a baseball player in that one. This is he's very restricted in his movement, obviously, in this movie. But see, the thing is, if you were to build this movie as a drama and take out the comedy from it, even says comedy when you play it on Paramount Plus, it's just ridiculous because it's not. I mean, it has comedy moments. It's like saying that Goodfellas is a comedy. It's not, but it has a lot of funny ass moments, which this movie has. Some bad, some good.
Yeah, I would argue the comedy is very strained at best and lethargic at worst. I mean, I think this movie, like, there is a fight scene between Eddie Murphy and Delarice that is it's just so terrible. They literally have a music cue that goes from Jaws to Psycho, and it's one of the weirdest fucking things I've ever seen. This is the start of Eddie Murphy trying to not be funny in movies, and those movies. This Boomerang and Beverly Hills Cop are the ones that come to mind immediately. Just absolutely the low point, I would say, for him. And I really hate it. Like I really hate when he just refuses to be funny in the movie.
Yeah, especially when you kind of build the movie as a comedy, and that's kind of restricted in the comedy sense. So, in terms of the plot of this movie, it's just basically Eddie Murphy grows up as a kid working for Richard Pryor in his club, and then kind of adopts him as his son. And then you got Redd Foxx, is kind of like the other older guy running some of the craft stables and whatnot. So he's like a comedy banter here and there, and you got the club stuff, and then you got the cops trying to come in, and you got rival gangs trying to come in, and here's where Michael Lerner comes in, and I just couldn't believe he's playing the exact same role as 8 Men Out, and I'm pretty sure he's played the same role in other stuff too that I'm not even thinking of, but it's the same thing. I want your territory. We got to talk to the bookies. We got bets. We got to do, we got to talk to the fighters to make sure they're not doing dives. The same kind of shit they were talking about in 8 Men Out, and it's Michael Lerner all over again. So I guess in terms of like typecasting,
I think Michael Lerner is a huge part of the problem because I can't tell if I'm supposed to take him seriously or not.
I take him seriously because I don't think he was doing any comedy. And I think they were also like leaning towards some other stuff too in the script that kind of went abandoned. Like, I'm pretty sure that they were going to reveal that woman that they claimed was his mistress was actually his daughter. Like, that's what I thought they were going with. And they just kind of went in a completely different direction instead of being smart with it, and just had Eddie Murphy just fucking blast her in the face, which I was like, holy shit. So a lot of crazy moments in this movie too.
Places.
Yeah.
I mean,
just the star of a different world.
Is nonsense. The plot of this movie is nonsense. The other thing that's so weird to me is that, like, they seemingly set up a heist and then don't deliver on the heist. That was really weird too.
I think they did deliver on the heist. They just didn't show the heist part.
It's so fucking weird, man. Like, this movie,
that's what I'm saying. This feels like it was the first draft or the second draft, and they just never got to the final draft because of the
I mean, this is why Eddie Murphy never directed a movie again. Like, this movie is just, and again, I think from a stylized perspective, like, this could have worked, but just the script and just a huge miscast across the board. I have never seen a movie where it just feels like everybody is miscast. Like, sometimes we talk about movies where like one or two people don't fit in, but this one, like, Eddie Murphy was not good in his role. Like, Denzel Washington would have been much better for this role. Richard Pryor, definitely not appropriate. Like, someone like Ozzie Davis would have been far better, or Luis Gossett Jr. would have been so much more appropriate for that role. It just feels like this is a movie that should have been a comedy, but Eddie Murphy's like trying to get all these comedic legends to not do one. It's really weird.
That's what happens. I forget what other movie too did that. I think it's The Martian, but that actually worked because the tone was both dramatic tied with comedic overtones of like one-liners here and there. Because if you notice,
I think that the thing about The Martian is that they cast Kristen Wiig and they cast Donald Glover, but Matt Damon was still the lead of the movie. That's the difference. Is here the comedic figures are the leads of the movie, whereas The Martian, they're kind of sprinkled in as supporting players. And I think that's a huge difference.
For sure, yeah. That was kind of like my comparison, but in the Martian's comparison, or in that Martian's case, it works. In this case, it's not working. And, God, I mean, before we get into the really, really shallow ends of this movie, let's talk about Danny Aiello, because I feel like he was maybe the one guy that was probably cast right, maybe. I don't know how you feel about that, but I just felt like he was the right kind of asshole again to play that kind of asshole cop, that antagonizing cop. I thought the scenes with him and Richard Pryor were actually kind of like, had that tension, that kind of like subtle tension of like, what are you going to do? Are you going to shoot me? We're going to play this game of cat and mouse. What are we going to do here? So I like that aspect to it. And the reason I mentioned, of course, Spike Lee as an alternate director is because, the work he did with Danny Aiello and Do the Right Thing. And I think he would have brought out even more out of the characters. He would have changed a lot of the casting. He probably would have brought in Denzel. But, I think he would have made this a lot more memorable and better. But again, he was just on they were on different wavelengths, obviously. And, Spike Lee, I think, was about to do that Denzel Washington movie about the blues around this time. I could be wrong about the timeline. But
yeah, I mean, he was like playing in the same sandbox.
Yeah, they were almost, it just feels like similar worlds. but Eddie Murphy just decided to do his own thing. So, so I do credit Danny Aiello, and it was interesting that they didn't show him getting killed, but we assume he dies, so that sort of leaved it open for something else that never got tied into again. So, again, the ending is kind of off, and that was one of the weird parts of the ending. They just leave him in this abandoned bank for him to suffocate to death, I guess. But let's talk about the worst of the worst. Jerome, are you ready for the Arsenio Hall talk?
Again, we have talked about a lot of movies in our time. We have decided that movies belong in the pantheon. We have decided that movies belong in the pile of shame. Arsenio Hall's performance in Harlem Nights is definitively the worst performance that we have ever had to discuss on any of the podcasts that we have ever done. I feel incredibly I feel incredibly confident in saying that. I don't think it's hyperbole. I'm going to let you describe it, but it is an abomination.
So basically, what happens is this character gets killed by the mob, and he plays the guy's brother who gets killed, and he thinks that Eddie Murphy did it. So he's chasing Eddie Murphy, but he's also crying because he's incredibly sad, obviously. He finds his brother's fucking throat slit and shot at. But then he's like trying to do comedy at the same time. Like he's trying to do a comedic performance of a traumatic person going through a traumatic event, which sounds ludicrous to say out loud. But that's kind of the directional take that Eddie Murphy gave Arsenio Hall, is like, hey, this guy's going through some tragic stuff. He just found his brother dead. Try to make it as funny as possible. And that's like, what? And and it's just fucking it's probably the worst performance I've ever seen in a movie. Top 3 bar none. I just couldn't believe the tone deafness of it. Completely tone deafness of it. Like if this was like, let's say Martin Scorsese directed this scene, he would have made it serious and got the serious tone over in the nature of the fact that this guy's brother was just killed and that this guy wants revenge, instead of just doing over the top comedy and over the top delivery. And it's just like, what are we doing here? It made me realize Arsenio Hall is not he's never a great actor, but he was never like a great comedian actor. Yeah, he's more of a talk show guy.
His career was not in acting. And it's weird, like he's fine in Coming to America. Like I'm not gonna say that he was a movie star, but boy oh boy, like this, if we saw this in a theater today, it would be memed to death and people would be talking about it for years.
Yeah, and so we mentioned in the Street Fighter episode, if you ever need a facial reaction of a background guy, you hire Miguel Nunez Jr. And he was also in this scene, and he was doing his job. Like he was doing his job, reacting facially, like with his facial expressions, and the way he makes his face like kind of wacky sometimes in terms of his reactions. He was definitely getting paid for his job here. But man, Arsenio Hall just like took that tone and made it so tone deaf. It went beyond like, I don't know, like, because there's like a level of like tone deafness that becomes like kind of funny, like I don't know, man. It just was like total like a misfire. Like
I can excuse Richard Pryor for not being great. Like I've tried to be very sensitive because obviously he's not well, but I mean Arsenio Hall is just inexcusably bad. And I do have to say, I think we have to put some of the blame on the director. Like the director can choose what to keep and what to not keep, and he chose to keep those takes in there, and they're not good. Flat out not good.
Yeah, that was the issue, and I think Eddie Murphy learned the hard way about being a director is a lot more than just being on set, telling people what to do. There's a lot of the post stuff that I don't think he was ready.
Again, this is why Tom Cruise and Arnold Schwarzenegger never became directors, because of something like this. Like this is why you take a step back. You produce, you don't write and direct. You don't do the things that actually require you to really put in the work day to day. Like it's just, this is why those two, I think, smartly decided to never step behind the camera.
Yeah, and the running time, I would say, is, I guess, I don't know, it's an hour and 50-ish. So I guess that's okay.
This felt like a 3-hour movie. This was an excruciating.
This was in one sitting, so it didn't feel that bad.
It took 2 or 3 sittings. I can't believe this movie made $60 million. Like, I know that this movie didn't make money. I cannot believe it made $60 million though.
Yeah, there's some weird math here, but I guess that's just the Hollywood math of it all. It's like a $30 million budget, gross 60 million just in the U.S. and Canada alone, and was somehow a failure. And I don't know if it's a failure in terms of like the media labeled it a failure to bring the movie down even more, or that there were some financial things going on that when it was released on home video, it never made the money back even then. So I don't know. It could, because it's very strange to consider this movie a failure at the box office when it doubled the budget, but. Who knows? Hollywood math sometimes.
Rightfully called this one of the worst movies of 1989. That is a decision that I wholeheartedly agree with.
Yeah, there's a lot of movies in 1989, like I mentioned, that needed a lot of work. And you can look. We both love Back to the Future 2 to death. We can both agree that the script could have had more work to it, right? But
I don't think that was a strike issue, though, specifically.
It feels like everything from 89, like the bad movies that we see from 89, it's not a directing thing, except maybe this, but like a lot of it had to do with the writing and the lack of, rewrites.
I would definitely need to look at it more closely because the movies that I remember, Back to the Future 2, Batman 89, things like that.
Okay, another example, The Burbs. Like, are you a fan of The Burbs?
I don't think I've ever seen The Burbs, or if I have.
So I liked it a lot as a kid, but if you watch it now, it's clear like they're making up a lot of the dialogue on set because there's like half a script. But at the same time, like I forget who directed it, but the director was able to use that kind of vibe to carry out through the whole movie. Now, The Burbs is kind of like a cult classic to a lot of people. Some people, it misses a lot, and some people say it's because of the script.
It's Joe Dante.
Yeah, it's Joe Dante. So. I guess probably the direction carried that movie without the script, basically. But that's what I'm saying. It's like a movie like The Burbs is like a prime example of that, where a lot of the critics did not like it, but a lot of people ended up liking it, like on home video and on TV. But the script is not up to par. It's clearly not up to par because it really needed like another rewrite, obviously. But it still was fun. So it just kind of depends on who's the director again.
Look, I went into this movie giving it a chance because I remember like Popeye is not a very well reviewed movie, and I really liked it. So I went into this with an open mind, especially given that Richard Pryor and Eddie Murphy are together. But honestly, the only person that I think I enjoyed was Redd Foxx. I think Redd Foxx seemed to be the only person that was having any fun, and I think he was actually the funniest of the three. Which like. I'm not a Redd Foxx expert, so I cannot speak to his comedy, but he's the only person that I walked away having positive feelings about because he actually made me laugh, and it actually felt like he's the only person who understood the tone, at least of what his character was supposed to do, because again, he's kind of a side character, so he doesn't have to carry the movie, so he could just be funny.
Yeah, I think that worked out well for him when he was having his back and forth with Della Reese in the kitchen and stuff. That was funny because that felt like
I think the movie
felt like TV network comedy, so that worked.
They were on a TV show, and that's where Redd Foxx passed away, unfortunately.
Yeah, so kind of they had that chemistry, and they kind of went for that one scene, and it worked out. So they used him to his best abilities. Even though I do like the joke about the glasses, I did laugh at that because that shit was funny with the thick glasses. But that's just kind of like an elderly joke kind of thing that would have worked with like almost anyone. But yeah, it's kind of unfortunate because Redd Foxx, man, can really like have some great comedy moments. But I guess because of his age too. But I guess at this point, it's like Eddie Murphy was trying to work with his idols, so you got to kind of have to like settle.
Part of me wonders, like, Eddie Murphy works with a lot of white directors and with a lot of white co-stars, and you have to feel like, is he doing this for the culture? And like, is that how he's trying to present himself in this movie? And is that one of the reasons that it ended up being as disastrous as it was? Because he just, like, if Robert Townsend directs this instead, right? Like, does this become a much better movie because somebody else is directing it? Like, I would say yes. Like, it just feels like I appreciate what Eddie Murphy is trying to do, but it just feels like in the hands of a better director, like it has to go in a better direction.
Yeah, for sure. Well, in terms of like the art direction, I think they nailed it, and we mentioned the Oscar nomination. My other criticism too is like I didn't really like the opening title credits. I thought it was ugly. I don't know about you, but like Blue Velvet, I was feeling, but like the black font that they've chose, it just was not. It felt too flat. It felt like because like in comparison to like the '60s and '70s movies where you had like a Saul Bass kind of stylistic credit opening minimalistic style with like cool little graphics that were simple. This was totally the opposite of that. It was totally flat and uninteresting. So it didn't start out with the bang, and it didn't pick up after much too well. So I was kind of like disappointed with that. But again, I think that's just Eddie Murphy not having the experience to know that an opening title sequence can really affect the opening of your movie.
For sure. I mean, that's Harlem Nights. It's terrible. I gave this a 2 out of 10. If we were doing superhero pantheon, I would push for this to be put into the pile of shame because I think this is bad. I think this is truly one of the worst things that we've ever discussed on this podcast.
See, now here comes the Catwoman scale. On the Catwoman scale, this is definitely better than way better than Catwoman. So in my scale, that's a 2.
It is
a 2 out of 10 is Catwoman.
The problem with Catwoman is that it looks so terrible. That's the thing, is that this movie looks so much better.
That's why I'm giving it a 5. Like I'm settling on a 5. It's still an F in terms of like a grading scale, but I think I'm being more lenient, and I think a 5 is kind of like, wow, kind of like maybe too lenient in terms of this movie. But again, I think it's just a lot of circumstances. I'm trying to give the benefit of the doubt on some of these things, like Eddie Murphy being a first-time director and the script writing issues and the strike. But at least the costumes look really good, and visually, like you said, if you turn the sound off, it looks like a good movie. So I got to give it credit for that. And and the fact that this movie did double the budget, but somehow was a box office failure, always smells fishy to me in terms of like the media trying to like take down a movie a peg or two for being a failure and calling it a failure in different aspects when really it was just certain aspects and not financially. So, but this is a good example of showing the highs and lows of Eddie Murphy, right? We went from 1983, where he was at his height,
in his best, to one of his worst, and next week I think we're going to go somewhere in between. I think when we talk about Bowfinger next week, we'll kind of hit a nice middle range.
For sure, and that's when he goes back to the whole idea of doing multiple roles. And I love it when Eddie Murphy does multiple roles in a movie. I think that just adds a little extra, aspect to the movie that I think the audience kind of like draws to. You know what I'm saying? I think a lot of the stuff that Nutty Professor like was good for was the fact that Eddie Murphy had all these different roles, right? And I think the audience was drawn to that. So I think this idea that Eddie Murphy plays multiple roles, like it's Peter Sellers, right? Like that's this idea of actors doing multiple roles in the same movie is like it's like a wow kind of factor. Like, let's see where they can go with this. And he certainly has 2 distinctive roles in Bowfinger for sure. Because if you got to look at it on a spectrum, it's like 2 completely different people on the spectrum, and they're not even like related. And it's completely just a coincidence that one character looks like the other, and they play that into the movie. So I'm really looking forward to it. Bowfinger's about the love of movie making anyway, and we love movies, so I think it's kind of a perfect way to encapsulate that and end the Eddie Murphy month.
All right, so we'll be back. It's got to be better, right? We can't get any worse. For Brian, my name is Jerome. Thank you so much for listening. We will talk to you again next week.